You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, Jim Cantelon here. We continue in the book of Mark. Some of you, it's hard for me to conceive of this, but some of you have been watching JCT for almost 9 years now. And you know, if you've been watching it all those years, that this is my second cycle through the Gospels. Literally, it took me almost 5 years to do Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. And now we're back into the second cycle. And I'm seeing stuff this time around I didn't see last time, or I'm emphasizing things I didn't emphasize last time. I hope you're enjoying it. Hi friends, Jim Cantelon here. I'm in Malawi in a very, very interesting setting where I am with a number of leaders who oversee various aspects of our partner ministry here called Somebody Cares. And I just might read some of what they represent. We have leaders here who are involved with youth, some with safe motherhood, others with granny's care, some in the health sector, some in the education sector, some in the legal sector, believe it or not, almost acting as paralegals, some as administrators, village pastors, and chiefs. And I have the great privilege of spending 2 or 3 hours with them, just taking them through some of the strong biblical principles that are, if you will, the infrastructure of the ministry of Somebody Cares. And so here they are. These are key leaders, chosen leaders, and they're all here to praise the Lord. So friends, we are in chapter 7, verse 31 of Mark, and just before we read it, this is taking place in the region of the Decapolis. So, you know, as I was saying last time, Mark has Jesus skipping around all over the place without any transition sentences. You just boom, 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 boom. It's sometimes a bit of a whiplash just trying to follow him around. But now we're going to see him leaving Tyre by way of Sidon, which I find interesting when I'm reading it, because having been in that part of the world and having been in Tyre myself, I know that Sidon is north of Tyre. And so you assume as you're reading this that he came back to Capernaum, you know, from Tyre down to Sidon and then to Capernaum. No, he goes up to Sidon and then down to Capernaum. But again, Mark doesn't give us any detail, doesn't tell us about the long walk involved. He just goes for it. Anyway, let's look verse 31 of chapter 7. Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha, which means, be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. So, as I said, it's a lot of walking distance, a lot of days spent walking from Capernaum up to Tyre, Tyre up to Sidon, Sidon back to Capernaum. This is a region that was, I was going to say controlled. Maybe it was controlled, but it certainly was dominated by what's known as the Decapolis. The Decapolis was a federation of 10 Greek cities built by veterans of Alexander the Great's army. These were maybe in some cases generals, or maybe lesser than generals, but nevertheless they were prominent men in Alexander the Great's amazing army. And the purpose of these cities that they founded was for military self-defense. So they were really seen as fortress cities. The area of these 10 cities was large, very large, with Scythopolis, which is modern Bet Shan, which still serves some of the best hummus and pita I've ever had anywhere in the world. Anyway, Bet Shan, or Scythopolis on the west, Damascus all the way up on the north, and Philadelphia on the south. And they were all along or near the major trade routes and the military highways that went through that area. Very welcoming to Rome because the Decapolis was founded by them and was Gentile in culture, but it tolerated a Jewish minority. So there were Jews there, no doubt about it. So Mark, again, typically doesn't specify a city. He just simply says in the Greek, horeion, which can be translated borders or coasts, or even region. And Jesus had probably entered maybe a small border village somewhere along there. Nevertheless, he is there, maybe having a bite to eat, maybe going to stay overnight, whatever. And people bring him a man with a hearing and speaking impediment for healing. Now, Mark doesn't give us any explanation for what happens next, because it seems so unusual. Jesus spits, I guess, on his finger, and then he touches the man's tongue with it. Now, we know that spit, apparently, was considered an ancient cure for eye afflictions, but it certainly wasn't seen as a panacea for blindness. It's interesting that Jesus took him aside before he did this. And he did this also later with the blind man in Bethsaida. But perhaps the spitting was better done in private. I don't know. Why he did it, I don't know. He even stuck his fingers in the man's ears, spit on his tongue, and then makes this command in Aramaic, Ephatha, be opened, and restores both hearing and plain speaking to this afflicted man. The onlookers are amazed, of course. Jesus said, look, friends, please, just keep this to yourselves. Do me a favor. Which, of course, they didn't. And word quickly spread. Well, there you go. Now, who knows why Jesus did it this way? He knew where this guy was coming from. He knew this guy's worldview. He also was aware of the crowd who were watching. Even though he'd taken him aside, they obviously followed him. But there's no explanation for this. Variety, I suppose. Nevertheless, that's how he did it. Spit, touch the guy's tongue, fingers in the ears. Now he can speak, now he can hear. Case closed. So let's move on to chapter 8. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough food to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he'd taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also, told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples, and went to the region of Dalmanuta. Within a few days of this remarkable healing of the man who couldn't speak or hear, a crowd of 4,000 have joined him. And it's only because of his reputation. You know, if there's one thing that we have in common with the people of Jesus' day, it's that we all have afflictions. Now, we work with modern medicine and modern medical systems, and we have no idea what it's like to live without doctors, without medicines, without any kind of hope for sometimes apparently small afflictions that can grow into big afflictions. I can relate a little bit to this because of our work with WOW, working for Orphans and Widows in Sub-Saharan Africa. Kathy and I are on the ground teams there that are local church-based, go into some very remote areas. And if there is a clinic available, it's usually very small, under-equipped, undermanned, and in many cases 10, 15, 20 kilometers away. More than once, I've seen people who are more dead than alive being transported to these clinics in an ox cart, pulled by 2 oxen, no suspension, this thing banging over the ruts, and this person, more dead than alive. I've also seen more than once people being carried to these clinics in wheelbarrows. Can you imagine? Arms and legs hanging over the sides of the wheelbarrow, biting into their flesh. They get to the clinic and there's no medications, or there's no nurse available, or there's one doctor for 300 people and he's overtaxed and can't see you for 2 days. So I can relate to the desperation of these people in following Jesus wherever he went. In this case, it's 4,000. And they're hungry. The disciples have 7 loaves of bread. These are all Gentiles, by the way, not Jews. So Jesus miraculously multiplies those 7 loaves. There's also a few small fish the disciples have. He multiplies those. Everybody is fed till they're satisfied. This isn't just a little bit of a snack here. This is eating until they're full. And then there's 7 baskets of food left over. And it's almost like a sidebar to Jesus' ministry. Imagine, he spent the whole day healing people, and now as the day is about to yield to dusk, he's concerned about their welfare, and so he provides them with some food. What a compassionate man he was. And of course, Mark records no words of wonder at what just occurred. Just another day at the office for Jesus. That's the impression you get here. In some ways, that's what it was. I mean, we're talking about the Son of God here, as well as the Son of Man. And he could do these nature miracles without batting an eye. And he did it for the sake of the lost and because his heart was filled with compassion. What a man. In my book, Cantelon's Casual Commentary, which you can get, by the way, just Google it, Cantelon's Casual Commentary. Don't blanch at the price. I don't know why publishers ask what they ask, but it's well worth it. 520 pages. I make commentary on the Gospels from my perspective as someone living in Israel and Jerusalem. And a lot of what I deal with in the book, I can't deal with on air because of time. Anyway, in the book, I call this next section, The Tiresome Pharisees. Verses 11 to 13, look at it, of chapter 8. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed the other side. Now, these pesky Pharisees were at it again, this time with a malicious motive. Let's reveal Jesus for what he really is. He's just a mere magician. In their view, Jesus was indwelt by Beelzebul, and as such was a kind of super demon. This power he had, in their view, enabled him to do earthly signs, but not celestial signs. Okay? Therefore, in asking him to perform a sign from heaven, that's a direct quote there, they would expose his inability to do so and reduce him to a mere sideshow. Jesus sighed deeply, despaired at this generation's spiritual blindness, knowing that they wouldn't see a sign even if he gave it. But a sign was coming. An empty tomb in Jerusalem would be all the sign the world one day would need. It would be the ultimate pivot point of history. I'm going to shift. You see, when I take a break, we promote working for orphans and widows. I want to show you just a little bit of a recent trip to Africa. We work in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and also in southern India. Now, over the years, 25, we've been doing this. We've also worked in Zimbabwe, northern Uganda, parts of Mozambique. But our critical mass, if you will, of involvement is in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and southern India right now. I've mentioned that I had a sense when I was pastoring in North America years ago that the Lord was calling Kathy and me to care for orphans and widows victimized by HIV and AIDS that was killing everybody back 25 years ago. And so, we just started from scratch. My ministry colleagues thought I was nuts. I was pastoring this really large church, a lot of status, a lot of profile on the West Coast. But, Jesus had 12 guys, okay? I'm not impressed by numbers. I'm impressed by authentic ministry. That's not to say that pastoring a big church is not authentic. I'm just saying that numbers really are irrelevant. Jesus ministered at 12 and changed the world, and is still changing the world. And by God's grace, you go where he leads you, and you do what he calls you to do, and you leave the number counting, if you will, up to him. Anyhow, slowly but surely, as we began to work with local churches in sub-Saharan Africa to begin with, the ministry grew, and we found ourselves exposed to more and more orphans and widows. And through the local churches who signed up with us, we began then to develop volunteer programs, and these volunteers, all local church-based, would go into the communities surrounding their church and care for the sick and the dying. And so, 25 years ago, Kathy and I met with a lot of orphans. And for 25 years, we meet with a lot of orphans every year, and widows. And it's a fascinating thing when you've been working 2.5 decades at this kind of thing, seeing little children become teenagers, become young adults, become doctors, nurses, pastors, fathers, mothers, all rejoicing in the love of God. I mean, you talk about fulfilling and satisfying. I'm blessed to be involved in this kind of thing. But recently, we were in one village, and the teenagers in the village wanted to hear from me. They'd heard from me in the general speaking. I'll go to the villages, and there might be 1,500, 1,000, sometimes 2,000 who've gathered there, not just from that village, but villages surrounding it. They sit on the ground, in shade if there is shade, and they want me to speak to them for hours, and I give them at least an hour. But then I'll go from group to group. I'll go to the widows group. I'll go to the young mothers group. I'll go to the elderly grannies group. And then I go to the youth group separately from the general speaking I do. So over the course of a day, I'm talked out, believe me. So in this case, I'm just walking to this group of teenagers. And they're very happy to see Kathy and me, and they sing and they dance and they rejoice. And what thrills me about this is I'm looking at these kids, and I'm seeing people that I knew when they were little. People I knew when they were in that little mud rondable with the mud floor, and their mother dying. And I'm sorry. I just find it very moving. Some of them are actually learning English because they want to learn English. But for most of them, it's Chichewa, and I speak with an interpreter, and they're just on the edges of their seats, or if they're sitting on the ground, leaning forward, taking it all in. It's not just moving, friends, it's humbling. And I'm fully aware of the fact that, we're the thin edge of the wedge. The Lord has called us to set this up and to oversee it for all these, 2.5 decades. But it's the people on the ground who are really doing the work. And the people on the ground, I call them champions. In every case, it's a pastor who has a vision that is consistent with our vision, that God is a father of the fatherless and defender of widows in his holy habitation, and they should care for them. And they do it with nothing, but I've made it very clear to them that God doesn't front load ministry. He doesn't say, here's $1 million, go and do the job. He says, do $1 million job, I'll pay the bills. That's how the Lord works. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. In other words, his wealth is limitless. He knows the need before we ask him, and he will supply the need according to his riches in glory. But what he's looking for are people who are prepared to take the leap in the dark and do something about his calling to the orphan and the widow. I couch this whole calling, of course, and you've heard me if you watch the program time and time again, about righteousness and justice, right relationship with God, right relationship with neighbor, love for God, love for neighbor, loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving your neighbor with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, even loving yourself with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But to me, declaring the gospel, preaching Jesus is vital. That's the righteous side of the equation. But then being his hand extended to the least of these, as he called them, to me is just as vital. It's the justice component. You can't have one without the other. In fact, righteousness and justice come from a similar concept in the Hebrew, whether it's tzedakah or mishpat. They both have this sense of this idea with this sense of loving God, loving neighbor, not just serving God and serving neighbor, but actually loving them, loving the neighbor with all your heart. So, and to love means to add value. So you got to do what you got to do. And I'm aware of the fact there's a thin edge of the wedge, not so thin, but an expression. I'm representing you. I'm not just representing the Lord, but I'm representing his body. And when you come alongside and support JCT, you're supporting WOW. You support WOW, you're supporting JCT because we're one and the same. But when you come alongside in your support, not only with your finances, but also with your thoughts and your prayers, boy, prayer is so vital. It means it's a team effort. It isn't just, some do-gooder out there trying to change the world. This is a case of us together being salt and light at a critical time in our world's history. And instead of cursing the darkness that's out there, we're lighting a candle. So I would encourage you to consider lighting a candle. Come alongside. Let us light candles together. And let's make a difference in the darkness and the sorrows of the world of the orphan and the widow, especially in this day, at this hour. I'll be back right after this short break.
Wow! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partnered champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and President Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
I mentioned a moment ago the importance of prayer. Prayer is really important. And prayer is not a difficult thing. You don't have to say a lot of words when you pray. In fact, I love Ecclesiastes. It says, God is in heaven, you're on earth, let your words be few. Good word. But it's such a good thing for us to lift one another up in prayer and to, in our case, pray for these champions, for these volunteers, pray for these orphans and these widows, pray for these pastors, these churches that are going more than the second mile and caring for these dear afflicted ones. By God's grace, in Jesus' name, we can make a huge difference. So pray. Doesn't take a minute, sometimes just a few words, but remember these dear ones before the Lord when you pray. Thank you for watching. See you next time.